So, folks, I know that I have already done an incredibly long and detailed segment on the racism coming out of conservative pundits when it comes to AOC, talking about how African Americans and the civil rights movement fulfilled the promise of democracy. And I figured, what the heck? We're going to do it again, but much shorter this time, with Michael Knowles. And I do apologize in advance. Michael Knowles is going to attempt comedy here, and I apologize.
Whoopsie. The Democrats' most prominent congressman and leading presidential candidate, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has just raised eyebrows after an appearance on Ilana Glazer's podcast.
Now, I do want to say also, right at the top, a lot of people, when I talked about AOC being like literally the most popular Democratic politician currently in office, right, among both the general population and the Democratic Party. The only two political figures that poll more popular than her are Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. Okay? And I know when people didn't watch that video because I bring out the polling data that shows that this is true, right? And I have been paying attention, of course, to some of the weather vanes, the which way is the wind blowing. And what I see is places like the Washington Post running relentless attack pieces against AOC. And what's very interesting to me is that Michael Knowles starts this off by acknowledging that AOC is the most popular frontrunner right now for a possible 2028 presidential run. I do find that interesting. I find it interesting that all of the traditional enemies of the left are right now coming out to attack AOC. And I think it's because they see what I saw, that she's going to run. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I do encourage you guys to go look at my latest AOC video, because she spoke in Martin Luther King Jr.'s church. And it's only a 5-minute long speech. It is, I don't think she winds up there with the blessing of an establishment Democrat if she hasn't made some serious friends who are willing to at least open the door for her to have a chance at winning. Yeah, they see her as a threat, for sure. And I am heartened by this. But let's continue
in which she claimed that black people created democracy.
There are very few real archetypes of what America is all about. I think about the civil rights and voting rights movement and how Black Americans really created democracy in this country.
Right. That's exactly right.
Now, both of these women are known for their incisive, nuanced political analysis.
I vow to tweet once a week, vote for Hillary, yas, yas, yas.
So
I shouldn't have to point this out, but on the off chance a conservative is watching this video, that's from a sitcom. That's not political commentary meant to be taken as a serious indicator of a think piece on politics. That was a joke.
Objections to AOC's claim must stem from historical ignorance, which is why I am here to clear up the confusion and explain how black people created democracy. Most scholars credit the earliest attempts at democracy to ancient Greece, specifically to Athenian leader Cleisthenes Jackson III. It wasn't until the founding of America, however, that democracy really came into its own. The Founding Brothers, led by Jamal Madison, wrote the U.S. Constitution, a document that would... hold on one second. I'm being told that everything I'm saying is both factually incorrect and at least mildly racist. The good news, though...
I guess in Michael Knowles' world, it's fine to just be racist, as long as after you're done, you say, I guess I was being racist. That doesn't make it okay. You wrote this script. You filmed it. You put it out there. But okay.
Is that this message comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was kind enough to include this check for $100,000.
Fun fact, the Southern Poverty Law Center only paid extremist conservative individuals if they were snitches who were telling them facts about, for example, the Ku Klux Klan so that the SPLC could sue the Ku Klux Klan into bankruptcy, which they did. That's what they used the money for. The money that went to extremist groups. It has been known for the last 60 years was going to pay informants so that they could sue the shirts off the backs of the Ku Klux Klan and other extremist groups. It was part of the reason the Ku Klux Klan is basically a non-entity outside of a few handful of holdouts in the Deep South. God, infuriating. Okay, but also, I do want to address how Michael Knowles is wrong for his part 1. Okay?
When I need more information, I turn to know less.
This is just too surreal for me.
And let's talk about this. And if you watched my previous video talking about Steven Crowder's take on this whole situation, you'll know that I have a number of different sources. In that video, I listed different groups, different tribal affiliations, different societies, civilizations across Africa, across time, many of which predate Athens and the democratic experiment there, and how many of these groups practice different democratic forms of governance. And I'm going to do that again a little bit here, because again, what this looks like when we're talking about different nations, different societies, it looks different. Of course, in many examples across Africa, for example, you can find kingdoms, you can find places that had a ruler, right, who had a great deal of power, a great deal of wealth, but also a lot of those places had what amounted to a constitution of sorts, a kind of a agreement with the population that if violated, could result in his overthrow. This wasn't unique, right? But more than that, what I want you guys to maybe jump into a little bit here is the idea that where do you think the Athenians got the idea for democracy? Where do you think the good people of Athens got the idea for democracy? Well, when you look at the actual historical record, what becomes clear is that, of course, you have Solon. Solon is largely credited with being one of the people who, after a period of political turmoil, where the working people of Athens rose up against the aristocrats of Athens, and it was fought to a stalemate, of course. Solon was viewed as kind of this peacemaker who could, bridge the divide, come up with a new way of doing things in Athens. And where do you suppose, at the time, 6th century BC, where do you suppose Solon goes? Where would Solon have looked to in the 6th century BC? Well, can we think of any other large civilizations in that rough area of the globe that may have been around for thousands of years prior to Solon? Egypt, Snoogan. Bingo! Egypt! Solon goes to Egypt, and this is accounted for in a number of different historical texts. And some of the ideas that he is exposed to in Egypt are things that are a bit different. things that are a a little bit outside of the realm of comfort for Athenians, for the Greeks. And Solon definitely at this time encounters the idea of monotheism, of Aten, Egypt, famously part of Africa. But Aten and the religious practices of Egypt at this time would have been a bit of an eye-opener to someone like Solon. Because the idea was, effectively, everyone is equal under Aten. There are still, of course, different, tiers, different castes of society. But what you start to find is that, there was a relationship between these different groups of people. That there were afforded to different classes, different abilities, of course, but fundamentally there is a recognized relationship, a certain degree of recognition, a degree of, dare I say, collective decision making. And so Solon takes that back to Athens, and they strike kind of this grand accord in the city, and they try something new. The issue here is, of course, that Solon attempts to implement this new governmental system that still creates this tiered society. And it's essentially a sort of a participatory democracy, but you can only vote for people who have been, sufficiently favored by the gods, who are sufficiently aristocratic, sufficiently wealthy. And what winds up happening here is that just transitions Athens into a kind of oligarchy. It then devolves into tyranny. It devolves into an authoritarian rule when this kind of the accords of Solon are kind of collapsed. After that, you then have a massive backlash by the population of Athens to throw off the yoke of the oppressor, to end authoritarianism. And that is when you have kind of this evolution of ideas from, hey, instead of maybe only certain groups of people in society, certain castes of people in society being able to vote, maybe everyone. Because by that point, the idea that there should be this voting system had already been really entrenched. And so you then have this move towards direct democracy. But a lot of the ideas from here are derived from Egypt, derived from different elements. And of course, those elements continue to flow over time. And by the way, when the accords made by Solon collapse, where does he go? Once again, he flees to Egypt. Because again, Egypt is this massive bureaucratic state that is able to recognize a legal relationship between even the highest ranking people of the society and slaves. Even slaves have a participation in the society and decision making of Egypt. And it is these ideas that then evolve in Athens into this participatory democracy. And so, again, like this idea that like Athens invented democracy, there are elements of democracy all over the place. And even someone who is racist, like Michael Knowles, should know that if he spent any amount of time doing research on this, okay? And this is a bit of an outdated terminology, but the people who study the history of democracy and democratic principles across the world, there's a phrase called primitive democracy. And that is what is generally practiced in almost every tribal form of government. I think it's kind of a racist holdover from the past that it's called primitive democracy. That principle you find popping up independently in places like North America pre-colonization. You find it in places like all across Africa. You find it in Asia. You find it everywhere. Yes, proto-democracy, I think, would be a better term. But in my research for this segment, the one I kept running into was primitive democracy, and that did not strike me right. Proto-democracy it is. All of this to say is that democracy, rather than being a unique invention of the Athenians, is rather, I think, one of our natural states of being. It is one of the things that allows us to live in community with each other. A basic form of participatory democracy. Direct democracy, rather. That is how you get many different organizations across and civilizations across Africa and Asia and the Americas that practice this largely the same form of government, but then it can evolve in various interesting ways, right? In a lot of Europe, of course, it devolved into feudalism, devolved into empire, devolved into oligarchy, you know? But that's not what it always turns into. So all of that to say, Michael Knowles is just wrong here. And he's also being disingenuous. And he knows that. And I know he knows that because let's just take a quick look at the rest of this video. It's quite short, but he manages to be remarkably wrong.
Okay, I've looked into it some more, and it turns out that AOC was really talking about how black people created democracy in America because of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Before that, black people apparently were not even allowed to vote. Black Americans only gained the right to vote with the passage of the 15th Amendment in 1870, which was...
If Knowles had been in charge, they would have called it Savage's socialism.
I mean, yeah, Michael Knowles would have doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down on all of the racism if he had been in charge. Like, this is a point that is so stupid for Michael Knowles to make, so disingenuous. I want you to understand that the only reason he is making it is because he thinks all of his conservative audience is made up of stupid, gullible morons. All right? And I'll tell you why after I play a little bit more of this. Also, Sake Tanuki, thank you for the tier 2 or the 2 tier 1 subs.
Is 100 years before the civil rights movement. So in any case, the point is, at the very least, black people could not hold public office. Before the civil rights movement, not a single black person was elected to Congress, except for these guys. So, oh, that's still going. Well, okay, maybe black people didn't.
So I'm going to tell you why this is particularly infuriating and incorrect and deeply disingenuous. And I've talked about this before, right? I've made reference to George White, who was a representative of the state of North Carolina, right? And George White was black, and he left office in 1901. And he gave a very famous speech upon leaving office, okay? And in that speech, he talks about how he leaves Congress knowing that he is going to be the last African-American elected official on the national stage for quite some time. And he was correct. It took almost 30 years after he left office for another black person to be elected to Congress. Okay? Michael Knowles here is trying to make it seem like, oh, well, black people got the right to vote in 1870, and it's just misinformation that black people couldn't be elected prior to that. Well, here's the thing. In 1870, when black people got the right to vote, what was one of the first things to start happening across the entirety of the South? Something called the Black Codes began being introduced. And this was the building blocks, the premises of the entire Jim Crow, right? The proto-Jim Crow, if you will. This was pushed back upon by the Reconstruction Amendments and the enforcement thereof. However, over the next 20 years, Southern racists would slowly pick apart and undo the Reconstruction Amendments that protected the rights of African Americans to go vote, right? And this is why, by the time you get to 1890, you start to see a massive phase out of elected African Americans to national office. And then from 1901 until I think 1929, 1930, you do not see another African American in Congress. And then you do start to see African Americans in Congress. And they are few and far between, because by that point, you also have something very important everyone should know: one of the worst Supreme Court cases of all time. And that is Plessy v. Ferguson, right? Which is 1896. And that sets the stage for the the regional codification of Jim Crow. And to some degree, a national codification of it. And that's when you really see that again, George White is well aware of Plessy v. Ferguson at this time. And then you have just a massive period during which African Americans systematically have their rights stripped away with bullshit tests, with fees to vote, with, systematic defunding of their schools so they couldn't become literate and vote. There were a whole host of different things here. Yeah, Plessy v. Ferguson is separate but equal, right? It's separate but equal. And that's really what brings Jim Crow into full force. And it is, I think, that in this video that is about the right of African Americans to vote and what democracy is and what it means, that Michael Knowles straight up lies to his audience about what the Voting Rights Act is, what it does. The Voting Rights Act is integral to ending the systematic oppression that existed from the introduction of the Black Codes in the early 1870s, right on through to the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Because all that shit that started the moment that first Black Code was introduced, that was a period of time lasting almost 100 years. 100 years of disenfranchisement. 100 years of bullshit excuse to deny Black people voting rights after bullshit excuse. And I need you all to understand, because it's very important to me, what he is saying here is effectively, well, the civil rights movement was stupid because they already had the right to vote. What were they complaining about? Am I right? And the reason the Voting Rights Act was worded the way it was and had to be amended subsequently to that was because there was a recognition amongst the people who passed this law, who voted for it, who wrote it, that the South was going to try any kind of underhanded tactic it could to disenfranchise African Americans. That's exactly what happened the moment the VRA got gutted. The moment the John Roberts Court destroyed the Voting Rights Act, the entirety of the South moved to gerrymander majority Black districts out of existence. And they're doing it partly to consolidate political power, but also partly to reestablish white supremacy. This is their "the South will rise again" moment in this country. Let's not pretend we don't see exactly what it is. Let's finish this up.
Exactly create democracy. But AOC's point is that in Tennessee, at least, Republicans are removing the only Black representative, Steve Cohen, who is actually not Black, and the Republican that he beat is Black. So,
Hey, Michael?
Yeah.
We just got another letter from the SPLC. They said they'll send you another 10 grand if you say the N-word.
Ha ha ha. The joke is that he's willing to say the N-word. Ha 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 ha. How funny. But I will also say here that, okay, I'm gonna play the last couple seconds of this video. I wanted to spare you from it, but you deserve to be as mentally scarred as I am.
The more you knows.
The Daily Wire cannot collapse soon enough. So, anyway, one thing that is really interesting about this entire video, right, is that the final argument he makes is that this guy is actually...
Who is actually not black.
White! Checkmate, liberals! Except Michael Knowles here, while talking about democracy and talking about how America has perfected democracy, really ignores a key element of American democracy, right? And what is that? You know what? Let's head over to the USCIS. That's right. We're going to a government website in 2026. It's a basic worksheet for children. Democracy in the United States. The United States is a representative democracy. That means our government is elected by citizens. Here, citizens vote for their government officials. These officials represent the citizens' ideas and concerns in government. Now, this is a basic series of sentences to explain how our country works to children. And I shouldn't need to point this out, but when you systematically disenfranchise an entire ethnic group to deny them representation, that is racist. Even if the person that they are voting for is not of the same racial category as that voting bloc. Like, it's not a difficult premise to understand here. But like Michael Knowles, I want, if a conservative has made it this far into the video, I want you to understand, Michael Knowles thinks so little of you that he puts your level of understanding at below that of an elementary school child. That's how little he thinks of you. It is truly wild. It makes me so sad. It really does. Like, conservatives are treating the gutting of the Voting Rights Act like a joke, as if it isn't a declaration of war against the very notion of democracy in America, as if it is not the death knell of a free and fair republic. And like, I do need you guys to understand, the death of the Voting Rights Act is effectively, it effectively drags us, whether we would or not. It drags us, it drags elected Democrats, it drags establishment Democrats, whether they want to be or not, drags them kicking and screaming into the streets to have a knockdown brawl with elected Republicans. And your options there are either get the snot kicked out of you or to fight. Those are the two options left to Democrats. Because I gotta be honest with you, it's not gonna work out well for them if they just like curl up into a ball, which is what a lot of Democrats have been opting for. Looking at you, Jared Polis. Looking at you, Amy Klobuchar. Looking at you, Chuck Schumer. Even though you think all the people are aroused right now, I don't think you seem to be acting like it.
People are aroused. I haven't seen people so aroused in a very, very long time.
And so, all of this being said, Michael Knowles is just dumb and wrong. And not only that, we need to be organizing against people like him.
Democracy 2.0 is a viable thing? Maybe under a different name. But what makes that work, and how can we use our current system to make it happen?
You will have to elaborate on what you mean by democracy 2.0. Do we include Jeffries as well? I mean, yes, of course we include Jeffries, but like Jeffries at the very least recognizes the Voting Rights Act being gutted as an existential threat. Like, he might not be acting hard enough on it, but he is at the very least recognizing it and talking about it as an existential threat, which is not nearly enough. We need people to be acting. We need expediency. We need urgency. That's what we need. And yet, all we have, at the end of the day, is all we have ever had, which is each other. It is each and every one of us who gets up in the morning and goes out and works for a living.
To
Oh, okay.
elaborate, I wanted your opinion on what a 2.0 could look like.
Okay. A 2.0 for democracy in this country, if I had to just wing it, have not thought extensively about it at the moment, at least in these terms, but what it would look like, what the kind of platform we need right now from a Democrat, we need, and this is not in any particular order, okay? But we need Supreme Court reform. We need the killing of money in politics. Like, that should no longer be a thing. The end of Citizens United. We should be having Medicare for all as a primary material good to offer people. We need trust busting to go along with the end of Citizens United. We need to be smashing these mega corporations that have amassed supercharged war chests that are larger than the GDPs of countries. We need a change in how voting is done, ranked choice voting, or some other type of voting system, though that would have to come from the state level. We would need some kind of potentially proportional voting to just end, districts in this country, the end of the Electoral College, proportional voting for the House, maybe even expanding the House of Representatives. We would need some pretty substantial systemic reforms across a wide variety of platforms. But I think maybe one of the number one positions is that when this next person leaves office and like the majority of the work on Democracy 2.0 is done, whoever leaves the presidency needs to burn their bridges behind them, needs to destroy the capacity of the executive branch to wield as much power as the executive branch has been wielding, right? And that's not even touching the various things that like need to happen. Restoring funding to USAID, making sure that like we have disentangled ourselves from foreign military conflicts, restored faith in our country on the national stage, and I'm not even talking yet about like the things I would want to see happen like as a socialist. These are just the things necessary to bring us back to a functional form of governance that is democratic, right? And so that's like a handful or maybe two handfuls of policies that I think need to be seriously considered. And I do think that also along with all of this, there needs to be a massive, massive effort to restore a sense of accountability when it comes to elected officials. Because right now, a lot of people are allowing Donald Trump to get away with an unprecedented amount of political corruption because they just assume all politicians are that corrupt. Trump is just honest about it. And so part of the reason I talk about the need to prosecute elected officials and bureaucrats and CEOs and boards of directors that are all engaging in projects like building concentration camps, creating work programs for undocumented immigrants that are put into these concentration camps, etc. Part of the reason I talk about that is because a major reason so many people have lost faith in our country and lost faith in like democracy as a project is because they see all of these people doing the corruption out in the open and none of them are ever held to account. And that was a problem prior to Donald Trump too. It was a problem during the Biden administration, during the Obama administration. It has been a problem for a while. My mind goes back to the 2008 financial collapse, and practically none of the institutions or, people responsible for plunging us into that recession were prosecuted. Like hardly any of them saw any kind of consequence whatsoever. Many of them made more money. When that crisis happened, who got bailed out? It wasn't the homeowners. It was the banks that gave out the terrible loans. And so that's, I think, kind of the seed for all of this mistrust in the idea of democracy, in the idea that good governance is possible. And so I guess that is another major component of what needs to happen in a democracy 2.0. So that, I guess, is my pitch here. We can shoehorn that in at the end of this Michael Knowles video. That's fine. But folks, it all starts with us getting involved on the local level. It starts with us joining our local Dems, joining our local DSA, making our Democrats more progressive, kicking out the corporate Democrats, holding them to account from inside the party. You can think of it as a takeover of the Democratic Party. That's kind of what needs to happen here. Good meaning folks of like moral character who actually give a damn, who aren't kowtowing to corporate interests, need to get involved on the local level and fucking shift this machine in a more positive direction, or at the very least, cripple its ability to operate against other progressives elsewhere, right? On top of that, we need people to get involved in DSA. We need people organizing labor. We need people getting ready for things like general strikes, work stoppages. We need people getting ready to organize that worker labor on a mass scale. And it starts with each and every one of us doing what we can, showing up to some meetings and coordinating with like-minded people who also want to help our communities in a similar way for similar ends, right? If you get organized on the local level, if you build up enough political will behind it, you can get a Montana Plan initiative started in your state, which means getting a ballot initiative on the state level to ban corporate money from politics. You can do that. You can get a ballot initiative to amend the state constitution or to amend different state laws or statutes. You can also work alongside locally elected politicians to build up political pressure to pass bills through state legislatures that ban corporate money in politics. This is something that Hawaii is currently trying. It is going to the desk of their governor to sign. Montana is trying it out with a ballot initiative, I believe this November. So there are multiple efforts doing this already underway. You can start making that happen in your state too. Okay? You can make sure AI data centers aren't being built. You can stop ICE from being able to operate openly in your city or town. There are so many things you can do, but it all starts with getting organized. Now, if you got anything out of this, hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. Comments longer than 8 words really help in the algorithm. And last but not least, please consider checking out ImogeneOlivia.com, gender euphoric lingerie designed from the ground up with trans femmes, also tested with cis men, cis women, non-binary folks. It is comfortable, sexy lingerie, and it's non-tuck. So go check it out, ImogeneOlivia.com, link down in the description, and let's keep on going.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather around. Twitch and YouTube and swishy streams. All that content is bursting the scenes. Politics, being and plenty more. Your sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's